Happy 2025 and welcome to one of our favorite episodes of 2024 featuring an incredible conversation with Washington Commanders head coach Dan Quinn. Coach Quinn's turnaround of the Commanders has been nothing short of impressive, an inspiring testament to the principles he shares in this discussion. This episode was co-hosted by John Luce, the associate head coach at Army, and along with his wife, one of the founders of Lawrence First and Goal, one of my favorite charities and events of the entire year. We dive into some of the blueprint behind this leadership and success that fueled the Washington Commanders during the 2024 season. Coach Quinn provides invaluable insight into building strong relationships, setting clear expectations, and creating an inclusive and motivated team environment. I think this conversation isn't just a roadmap for coaches, it's a masterclass in leading with integrity, creating resilience in a team, and unlocking the potential of players and coaches. Be sure to check out the video version of this conversation on CoachTube and explore Lawrence First and Goal's extensive library of over 500 courses dedicated to professional development in all areas of the game. Every purchase of Lawrence First and Goal content supports pediatric brain tumor research and cancer services. Links are available in the show notes. Let's dive into this powerful episode and uncover the winning edge that has defined Coach Quinn's career.
Lawrence First and Goal is a nonprofit organization, a labor of love, started in 2004 by John and Mary Ann Luce in honor of their daughter, Lauren, a pediatric brain tumor survivor. Since its inception, LFG has raised more than $2.87 million toward its mission to provide financial support for brain tumor research and cancer services, to offer financial and emotional support to families living with pediatric cancer, and to increase awareness of the disease. The success of Lawrence First and Goal in its fight against pediatric cancer depends on the generosity of people just like you. Any gift can make a difference to a child who is living with illness. Connect with LFG on our social media channels. See what we're up to, follow our newest initiatives, and learn what you can do to help. Share with your friends. LFG has partnered with CoachTube to create a library of coaching clinics covering all aspects of football play, strength and conditioning, and coaching philosophy. Proceeds from purchased courses benefit the missions of LFG. Finally, Lawrence First and Goal has published some inspiring books to support the LFG mission. You can purchase the LFG publications Hope is Here to Stay, Lauren's Life Lessons, and the Manual of Football Drills and Skills, or Home Fields by Bill George. And proceeds will help fund research, cancer services, and family support. You can get your books on Amazon.com today.
If you don't have, a vision of where you are and where you want to go to first, like all the steam in the world isn't going to do you much because you don't even have an identity of who you want to be. And so if you can get those behaviors in order first, I think that goes a long way then to become the team that you want to be.
Welcome to today's special episode presented by Lawrence First and Goal Foundation, featuring an insightful conversation with the head coach of the Washington Commanders, Dan Quinn. In this discussion, Coach Quinn shares his wisdom on leadership, coaching philosophy, and team development. We learn from his journey in coaching and the impact it has had on his players and teams, and he shares what it takes to lead with passion, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The video version of this conversation is available on CoachTube for free. The entire Lawrence First and Goal library of almost 500 courses is available on CoachTube and is designed to help you develop professionally in all areas of the game. Remember that proceeds go to support pediatric brain tumor research and cancer services. Links to the content on CoachTube can be found in the show notes. John Luce, Associate Head Coach of Army, joins me as the co-host on this conversation with Dan Quinn. Enjoy. All right, we're back for our last of Lauren's First and Goal Spring Series, and we're really excited about today's guest. I'll turn it over to John Luce. John Luce, the Luce family, really worked hard on Lauren's First and Goal, and we're excited to be a part of it and continue to promote Lauren's First and Goal and offer some great opportunities for professional development as well. So, John, I'll let you introduce Coach.
All right, so I've known Coach Dan Quinn for a very long time. Probably met him at Hofstra, I think, probably the first time a long time ago. And, they had an unreal staff there. Raheem Morris was on that staff and a bunch of other guys, and it was a great staff, but really good friend. I've reached out to Coach Quinn twice now to, speak at Lauren's First and Goal, and both times he jumped right on it. Once is when he was just getting ready to be the defensive coordinator of Dallas Cowboys, where he did a great job, and then scrambling right after the draft, still took the time to do it, which means a lot to us. So for the people out there, it all goes toward pediatric brain tumor research and cancer services, every nickel we raise. And Keith Grabowski does a great job promoting it, posting it, putting everything together. So I want to thank him too. But we'll let Keith Grabowski do the questions, and we'll let Coach Quinn answer the questions, but he does a great job. In fact, I'll fire one more thing. One of the guys that I coached, and I won't fire his name out there, so I'll throw him under the bus with other guys, but he told me a long time ago, he goes, Coach Quinn is the best guy I ever worked for. And as far as like building team morale and being organized and all that stuff. So we wish you all the luck in the world with Washington. I know you kill it.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that.
All right, well, we'll get going with this, Coach. And, the last time you spoke at Lauren's First and Goal, talked about setting the standard, and you're back building a new team again. And You'll have guys coming in. You and I were talking about that here, and, another week or so when you get back together. So we're going to focus today on some of those topics and ideas. And just wanted to kick it off with the idea of leadership style. I really think, talking to a lot of coaches, how you do things is so important. It really has to fit you. So how would you describe your leadership style, and how has it evolved for you over your career?
I think when you're trying to light a fire, on a team or in an organization, it has to be internally, Keith, because if you force somebody to this commitment, if you force them into this, you just won't get the same space. So to me, the leadership part of it, you have to have some standards, that you want as a whole team, through the coaches, through the players. And if you can nail that piece first about building some of that together, so it's not just this is the rule, this is how we do it, but literally having a say and an involvement in that, I felt like those are the best moments, and the very best teams I've been a part of have been really good in the locker room first, where how is the behaviors and the actions when the leader is not there? Because if you have that part right, Keith, I think that's, to me, where it goes. I think where it's evolved, I thought early on leading was always you being the one, this is what I have to say, or this is what I have to do, to always lead it. I think there's an element of that that's true. You do have to be in front, but you also make sure that you're given moments for other people to step into those places to lead, whether that's assistant coaches, other players, because now the leadership can come from all sorts of spots. And knowing that you have a say in this fight goes a long way, because now the alignment all comes together. So I think that's probably how I say it's evolved. Early on, I felt like the leader had to do everything, had to be in front. But I think the more I moved on and learned, you better be able to delegate into some people to make sure that this whole vision of this thing of how you want to do it goes through the team, through the locker room, through the staff, and pointing out those moments when their time is to lead it. To me, Keith, that's where it's at. So involving everybody in the leadership process, to me, has been way more effective, especially with today's player.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that player-led, when you can see the leadership spread across your team, you're creating something special. What challenges have you found in trying to create that type of leadership within the different teams, organizations you've been a part of?
Yeah, I think first things first, you have to find, and when you see it, you have to acknowledge, point it out, and put it out there to say, this is the behaviors, this is the leading that I saw today. Might be from a coach, it might be, from a player, but those moments you have to watch for them. I think the best of the best leaders can see those moments when they happen and point out the things that went really good, and also the things, that didn't go like you wanted to, or you missed it. So I thought all of them are like these teaching moments. And when you get your group together or your staff together pointing out, hey, man, this is something that I saw that was really good. And if you want to take it a step further, Keith, then you hit to the staff and ask them, what did you see, from the position group, or what did you see from a player? So making everybody have more awareness of the leading that you see. I think most of us as coaches, the first thing that, you want to get into is the scheme and where it goes to. But like, if you don't have, a vision of where you are and where you want to go to first, like all the scheme in the world isn't going to do you much, because you don't even have an identity of who you want to be. And so if you can get those behaviors in order first, I think that goes a long way then to become the team that you want to be. So to me, man, point it out, recognize it, good and bad. And then if you really want to get more specific, ask the other staff members or the other players, what did you see that went really good? What did you see that could have been better? And now people have to be ready to be called upon. When they see it, they also have to know that I've got a stake in this thing and I want to be ready to deliver when my time comes.
So I know in the process of going to the Commanders, on both sides, there's so much learning. Is this the right fit, right? It's not a one-way street. You're learning the same way too. You've got to come in there and then align to what is this organization's culture, values, all those kinds of things. So as you're getting started out with that, and some guys have been there and would understand that with the organization, but how do you ensure that you're building right away that alignment?
Yeah. Number one, like state it right from the very beginning. This is what, we'd like to accomplish together. And then also by bringing in pieces that have a very clear understanding of those alignments. And I think, Keith, one of the best ways, to have understanding is to have some readbacks, with the staff or with the key influencers of your team after you debrief or after you have some discussions. Okay, Keith or John, why don't you read back to me what the message is or what we're expecting from here? And if you can have more clarity where other people have to say the same message, it doesn't have to be in the exact same language, Keith, but it does have to be in the same way. And so the more people that understand what you're going to do, I think that's a really big piece. So in Washington, for instance, one of the very first things that we did was, before we even broke up into scouting or coaching, was bringing everybody together to say, hey, these are some things, like I wanted to outline our norms, our behaviors, what we were going to be about, the vision I had for the team, how we were going to play. So every single person in that room had a very clear understanding of how we were going to get it on. And next, I wanted them to be able to articulate that. So if they were having, dinner that night with their family or out with some friends, that they could relay that same information, Keith, in their own way, but knowing that this is what we're going to be. And so I hope that when our friends and our family watch us play, that comes to life. The vision of how we wanted to play, of how we wanted to do things really comes to life. So I think more than anything, I wanted to state, what is the end goal that we're looking for here? And then work back from there to say, this is who we want to be. What are the steps that we need to take to ensure we can get to that space? Some of it's personnel driven, but not all of it. Some of it is just the way that we communicate and act towards one another, the way we support one another. And so I'm actually living that right now. As the players are here, we've had, a certain number of guys that are here for the off-season program that they get to start something from the very beginning. I think when you're talking about like team building, it's one of the coolest opportunities. I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call that are going to be future head coaches. To make sure, I want them to understand, like, you get this one moment, this one shot to say, this is how we're going to do it. And it doesn't mean a dictatorship, but it does mean sharing a vision of how you want to do it. And then collectively getting everybody on the same program to make sure this alignment's taking place. We're moving forward in this direction. And you'll know when you're really hitting it, Keith, because if you ask other people that weren't in a meeting or weren't in something, hey, tell me about the vision that you heard from so-and-so. And if they can give it back to you, then now I know we're hitting in the right spot.
Yeah, I think that's important, that everybody definitely can communicate those things. You've talked about behaviors and mentioned those a couple times already. And really, the behaviors are your culture. It's what you're going to see. It is the tangible part of everything happening on your team. And, aside from the things that happen on the field. What are the important behaviors you define for your guys? And how do you make sure that they know that, this behavior is performed this way?
Yeah, that's a good one, because I think sometimes people get the word like environment and culture, like they're not the same thing. Like an environment, if we all walked into your spot or John's spot, it's upbeat, it's positive, like that's an environment. But that doesn't necessarily mean the culture. The culture is like how we do things together every day. And so whether that's, this is the time we come to train, this is everything that we wear to go to this thing. This is how we practice. These are the things that are important. So for us at Washington, I wanted to make sure like competition is the central theme, like in all that we're doing. So in our first practice with the veterans, we went over the bags in a competition style. Who could do it the fastest, out hit the bag, just to emphasize once again, like competing in every single part of what we do has to be there. So I think that's a behavior to make sure like you're entering into practice or into the meeting room ready to compete and ready to go do things. So that to me is where you start setting some of those standards that you want. And you have to close your ears for a second, John. In the Navy, they have an ethos, all right, that they follow. And so that was important to me to understand why they did that. But at the end of it, it was really, they now had something to belong to. And then once you had something to belong to, you also have something to follow. And I think the best of the best teams follow one another because they now belong, to the same group and they're pushing in the same way. And if you can get that accountability coming player to player, as opposed to always from top down from coaches, then you got a chance to do like really special things because you're not waiting on a coach to tell you how to act or how to, perform in certain spots. And so the more you give players accountability and some leadership ops and they deliver on those, then your team, man, it can just take off.
I love that you made that. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to
take your earmuffs off now. That's fine.
That's all right. When you were talking about that, because Jeff Monken does the best job I've ever seen of the team building part. I mean, it's so much of it, obviously, right? We always think we win here because we have the best locker room in all of football, right? But, one of the guys that we both know, Ben Kotwika, worked for you in Atlanta, but he was our captain here. We were in 96 with Bob Sutton, which obviously he worked for you too, right? And he was so relentless as a player. Like I was coaching him. And I learned so much about leadership from him as a player, but he was so relentless that you had to almost put your arm around other guys that were on the football team, like, hey, it'll be all right. But you talk about holding it as standard, but you're right. When it's a player doing it, and we've had guys like that here, obviously, because of who we are. But yeah, it's great that you're getting that done because Kotwika was the best I've ever seen to do it.
And I love, like just the energy that people can bring to a program. If anybody would watch how you guys start stretch, at West Point and the energy and, that comes with that, how can you not be ready to go play? And so by Monk demanding, like you're going into practice ready to really compete and bring energy to it, like it just starts circling and everybody has it. They want to be a part of it. I think that's to me where it goes down because if the coaches have it, if the players have it, and they push one another to find new spots, that's a really good example. And like the example you gave with Ben, players have inspired us as coaches tons of times and taught us many things along the way. And so you had enough smarts to watch Ben and to see what made him unique and why on a team full of leaders, he was elected a captain.
That's right.
Imagine there could have been, 50 players that could have been elected, as a captain at West Point who would have been above, the average captain at, most other schools. So there was rare things that you guys brought out in him and he was able to articulate it to his teammates. And it's up to us to help with that language, to help them, give them feedback. Hey, I really liked how you led in this space because not everybody has Kotwika's leadership, that came from within. So giving players tools and techniques of how to lead, I think that's really important too, because if they're going to really lead, you don't get to just pick and choose when you want to do it. Once you're out there and you're starting to lead, you don't just get to go out when it feels convenient for you. And so that's a good lesson for any player that's ready to take it on. Hey man, like you do you really want to do this? Because it's not something you can turn on and off every day, because that's one of the very worst leaders, in my opinion.
You made a distinction there between culture, culture behaviors that go along with it, and the environment. And the environment's important as well, right? You want guys to feel positive about things. You want players to feel valued, supported.
Yep.
Football's a great melting pot, right? We have all kinds of different guys from different places, different backgrounds coming to us. So how do you create that inclusive environment for your team that, brings that positivity to everything you do?
Yeah, because I think when you think about it, Keith, it's a real privilege for us. Not only do we get to teach them leadership, but also like mentor them in certain spaces. We teach them in a lot of spots. But I think it starts with the staff. For the people that are on this call, the head coach, their first job is to coach the coaches. And if that can happen, and then that gets down to the players, to me, that's where it could come. So if you want really good juice and energy on your team, you better have it from your coaches first. It can't be, here's the head coach and I'll just skip a level and go down to the players. So coaching the coaches of what you want is really important. And I knew I'd do a good job when I hear something from a player that I may have said in a staff meeting, but never said in a team meeting. Because then I knew it went from me, to the staff member and down to the team. And so that, to me, is where it goes. If you want to get something really right, you have to start with the staff first. And if they're not willing to share in that vision that you want for the team, then I think, Keith, those are hard conversations that you have and say, hey, I've asked for X, Y, and Z, and I'm not seeing it. And you may have a coach, well, that's not really my style. Well, it is now, because this is how we get it on here. So like, it better become your style or we're going to have a hard time working together. So that, to me, if you can get that part right, because it's a lot, for one person to lead every single player on the team. Not saying that doesn't happen, but if you can get the coaches first, and whether that's a staff of 5 or 25, whatever that looks like, but if you get that part right, it'll transfer down to the players. And sometimes I'll just quiz the players to say, tell me about the meeting. What you guys discuss? And all I wanted to hear was, did the things that I had said early in the morning, say we had a staff meeting, was that getting discussed at the meeting? Are we seeing the same traits that we talk about on the field? And if you are, then man, your coaches are absolutely crushing it. And knowing that like those connections between assistant coaches and players, they are really strong and they're lifelong and they're impactful. And, for me, looking back, there's hundreds of players, through the years that I've coached that I still keep up with. And those relationships are really important. So if the assistant coaches get that part right, knowing the energy, the culture of what you're looking for, and that gets driven down to the players, then every new player that comes onto the team, it's also then there's other players that can help them with that. And to me, if you get all those things right, Keith, head coach down to the assistants down to the team, and now the team is able to bring along new players, that's a really big piece of it. So we've got about 20 new rookies coming in to the team. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing who gravitates, who takes somebody on, like what we all wouldn't pay for somebody to take you on as a rookie. Like if I'd asked any veteran that, they would have given almost anything to say, hey, man, this is how we do things. This is where we go. And so that's such a powerful role of mentoring somebody. And it doesn't even have to be at the same position. Most of the mentoring, it doesn't need to be about football. It just needs to be, this is how we operate. This is how we do things, and training, and processes, taking care of your body, whatever that looks like. So teammates doesn't have to be at the same position at all, but mentoring can come in any way. It doesn't have to be quarterback to quarterback. It can be a quarterback to a defensive tackle, as long as the connection's there and there's a genuine, feeling of like looking out for somebody. That rookie knows they'll be able to pay it forward in a year, knowing that, hey man, when I came into the league as a rookie, this was the person that took care of me. I get a chance to pay that forward when that happens. So I hate to hear when a player doesn't want to be involved, with a teammate. That's usually a good sign that that team's not very well connected.
Well, you've mentioned the staff, and you've obviously recently brought a group of guys together to be a part of the first Washington Commanders staff under your leadership. And I'm sure, quite a few of those guys you work with or knew before, but there's always those times when you're going to have to bring a new guy in. For you, aside from all the expertise with the X's and O's and technique, what are the things you really focus on to determine that this guy is the right fit? This is got a guy who can align for us. And I guess, how do you bring that out? What are some of the key discussions or maybe questions that you ask to be able to figure out that fit?
Yeah. And I think, like, again, I'm hopeful for the guys that are, listen to this as their first time head coaches. And, when they get into next year, man, don't rush this, in terms of the hiring process. Sometimes it could be like, I got to get this done. I got to get this guy here. I got to get this guy here. Man, it's so important to get it right, not get it done quickly. And by getting it done right, it means first part, keep some vetting, of some people that you would trust to say, tell me about his experience with the team. It may be asking a former player, what was it like in the classroom? What was it like on game day? And so I think you want to make sure when you're interviewing people, you want to be consistent with the questions of how you're going to do things. So talk me through an example when it was hard and you had to make a change. Give me an example when, another staff member had an idea and you thought, completely differently. How did you, resolve that conflict? Because as you guys know, like in football, there's going to be adversity that comes. There's going to be a game that's lost. There's going to be a player that gets injured and somebody has to step into that gap. There's going to be somebody disappointed in playtime or involvement. And so how does that person respond in those areas, I think, is a really big piece of it. If there was a way, and I've done this before, where when you bring somebody in, go get changed, put sweats on and go out onto the field. Because if you really want to get the measure of a coach, you need to get on the grass. These players are physical learners. And so that's the most important teaching that we're going to do is on the field. Where do their eyes go at practice so they can give somebody feedback quickly and not have to wait until they go inside, and watch the video playback. If we're not able to give the player immediate feedback after the play or, a play or two later, then we're really cheating them. And so that's an example of finding the right people, to go. I also think it's important, like, they don't have to be a clone of yourself. Wouldn't want to hire everybody who, talked and had the same beliefs I did. I think having other opinions, a different point of view, another perspective, I think is super important. So you don't have to have had worked with the person. And I imagine both of you and everybody on this call, we've had great friends that we never worked with until that time that we started together. And so you don't always need, well, I've worked with him. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a leap of faith knowing that there'd be good alignment, but you don't always see it exactly the same. I think that's okay. But at the end of it, you do know once we leave a meeting, there could be a disagreement or a difference of opinion, but this is how we move forward together. And I think those are the examples that I want to find out in the interview. Tell me about a conflict. Tell me about when things went wrong. Because the good parts, they roll easily. But in our game, there's going to be tough moments that are going to come up where a coach had to be let go on a staff. How did that person feel during that? A disagreement. I want to find out about an evaluator. So generally I'd put some film on and say, hey, would you write up this player and maybe give them 2 or 3 different players to look at and just have their opinion? Because in coaching, I think there's like 4 big pillars, Keith. It's teaching, and that's player to player, could be player to a whole group. There's communication, player to coach, coach to coach. As you're going through the evaluation piece, it's the opponent, it's your own team to go to. And the last one is planning. I think the best of the best coaches, this is how I game plan. This is how I plan for practice. These are the things to do. So those 4 pillars to me, I think the best of the best coaches have are communication, the evaluation, the planning. And if you can get all those aligned, then I think you're going to find you're going to have a fantastic staff. And the good news about like coaching, like it's always developing. And I think people talk about player development, but I feel like it's for us as coaches too. And if you get better as coaches collectively, I think how good your staff can get. If we're asking the players to improve on these things, if we do that as a staff, man, like this whole thing rises.
Yeah, you brought up that idea of, hey, get your coaching gear on. We're going out to the field. And, when I was at Baldwin Wallace University, I thought it was one of the smartest things we did. We were interviewing for a new offensive line coach, and our head coach had that as part of the interview. And holy cow, was that telling, right? Like to see that, that guy can be great on the board. He's great at the table, giving you all the answers, but now we want to see you up and do your thing. I mean, we do with all our players all the time, right? Put them through the performance evaluation. Well, let's see what you're like. Let's see you coach. Let's see you how you do, running these guys through a progression, giving them coaching cues, correcting them, all those things. It really told us a lot about all those candidates.
And how does somebody deal with a number of different people? So I'd have the other coaches in, coaching year 2 and put them through it, whether he's like in the college case, hey, this is a freshman offensive lineman, or in my case, a rookie linebacker, and say, all right, let's take you through, 2 or 3 year drills and why you need that. And how do you take, the certain coverage that you want to do? How do you drill it? And how do you make that come to life? Because to me, that's part of the planning I was talking about. When you're putting things in, how does the walk, crawl, run emphasis take place from a classroom, walking it through, getting it, and then finally we can get it to game speed. I want to hear the cues, how they teach. Do they stand around and talk a lot, or are they getting guys going? And so I think your coach was on it at that time to bring somebody along in that way.
You mentioned adversity. Adversity is one of the best teachers you can have, right? What's something, looking at the course of your career, a setback, a failure, whatever it might be in your career that taught you a valuable lesson about this profession and about yourself as a coach?
And I think the more we understand, like, you have to go in like expecting, things to go not exactly to plan. A number of them as coaches may be different levels that you're on the way up. So when you're an assistant coach, and John can relate to this, oh man, when I'm a coordinator, I'll do it this way. I'll call it this way. And then you get into that seat and it's a little different than you may have thought. And so recognizing I blew a call, calling a game, I made the wrong decision, on that down and distance, those kind of things. So those are ones that you learn from. That's adversity. I think as a position coach, when injuries take place, have you done a good enough job knowing this is the contingency plan when something happens? And so that's also part of your practice time to say, okay, let's use the example we were talking about, a linebacker that John had in Kotwika. All right, we're running, 2-minute drill. He's calling all the signals. Kotwika, you're out. Now, who's the next one that's going to stand up into those spaces? Because if you don't plan for them, Keith, I think you're really going to get caught off guard. And so knowing that when those moments happen, which they absolutely are going to, you better plan for them in advance for the adversity that comes. And then as a leader, as a head coach, I think the losses are the ones that everybody's looking to you into that moment to say, how are you going to respond? And I think the teams that ride the roller coaster have a head coach that rides the roller coaster where, when they're winning, everything's good, pumping it up. And when it's down, everybody sucks. And, that's where you go and you can't find a good rhythm. But knowing that, did we do out what we set out to do in terms of setting a game plan and doing it? And if you lose, knowing that, hey, we did what we said we wanted to do, you can live with that. But if your team's up and down, there's somewhere along the way that probably your coaching's that way too. And so I'd say if you're turbulent as a leader, I think your team will follow that. And so just know, man, the adversity is going to come. And I would say you have to sometimes create it in practice moments or in a meeting. So I can certainly remember like one of my first times as a coordinator, I was in Seattle and I was filming the meeting so I could watch them at night to see how I interacted. And I was just asking like general questions out, to the players without any name attached to it. In cover 3, what does the weak hook player here have to do to this? And Bobby Wagner, was staring at me and answering every single question, or Earl Thomas would do that. And so I went to watch it back that night. I said, you dumbass, like you didn't ask anybody any specific questions other than the people that already knew the answers to every test. So it made me come back the next day and say, okay, hey, specifically to that person, what's the answer to here? To quiz, to find out. So the only way you can do that as a coach, sometimes you did good presenting, but you never really tested the learning. I did a good presentation today. I really taught, cover 2 well, but you never tested the learning. All you did was give a good presentation. So it forced me to say, if I had a 30-minute meeting, hey, the first 2 or 3 minutes, this is what we're going to do. The next 20 might be the actual content of the meeting. But then the last 5, man, that's for the questions to find out what the learning is. Because if you're just ripping out like at a lecture, like, a big lecture hall, like we were all in college with, 100, students, and there's no questions that go, and you don't know who learned what. And so I think as a coach, you better figure that out before you get on the practice field.
Yeah. We obviously have a very dynamic game, and there'll be things that, come up once or twice a year in the course of a game. And, Bill Walsh, you read his book, obviously big on planning for all kinds of contingencies. And I did an interview once with a coach named Tony DeMeo. Tony coached college ball for a long time. And Tony used to do a thing called the disaster plan, like one day during camp, a period where he would put his team down by a lot and would work, on if we happen to face this situation, what are the things we do to get back? I mean, now you have analytics where can show you where there's, some opportunities and things you need to work on. But those things, that planning, how do you make sure you work in all those things where there are going to be those situations? I know I always ask my son plays college baseball now, and asked him growing up, watch his coach and whatever. I could think of a basketball game, last second shot, and he has them over and they're drawing on the board. And I could tell every kid's like, I have no idea what he's talking about. We've never worked this before. And of course the play didn't work. Right. So you have to prepare your players. You don't want them to go through things for the first time on the field in an actual game. So just working through those details, how do you go about that and make sure that you're covering all those contingencies?
Yeah. And I think it's a really important one because no assistant really wants to go through with that. They want to make sure the practice goes good. They got the right people on the right spot so they can really play it aggressively. So that does have to come from the head coach down, and it ought to be not spoken about prior to the practice. To say, if we really want to test ourselves to find out, where we're at, these things should happen in practice, but without everybody's knowledge beforehand, because that's how it's also going to be in the game. We're not going to be able to go into the game and say, okay, look here now in the fourth quarter, we're going to be down by 3. We're going to have 2 timeouts, but the ball is going to be at the minus 45. So knowing that you can create a little bit of that chaos, the first time it'll be uncomfortable, that you do it as a head coach, and then do it again and do it again. So now this is just how we do things. And there could be a time when you're really prepared for something and you get pulled out to, the next person that's going in. It can be frustrating for a player, but at the end of it, I think it makes so much sense to put people into these situations to see how it goes. I think the same thing as play callers, at some time at practice, offense coordinator's down, quarterback coach, you're calling the plays. Defense coordinator down, linebacker coach, you're now calling the plays for this period. So to use Tony's example, score situation could be down, but it also, if you really want to promote leadership and have the ability to, bring people up within the organization, put them into those leadership spots themselves as assistants. And you'll find out a lot about them too, who's ready for that moment. And living that together is a really cool thing. So I would also encourage anybody to go through that. Don't do it on the first day of practice. There's a lot that can go on. Right. But if you do these kind of things, knowing that like this is part of our game, like an adversity is going to happen, and let's get it right. Life happens, where somebody can't coach on that particular day, just like a player couldn't coach on that day. What are you going to do when that happens? I think COVID taught us a lot, to say, okay, coach is down for a game. And I know for a preseason game, I had to miss, when I was in Dallas, and, certainly didn't want to, but we'd already laid out, this is what would happen if Dan's out. This is what would happen if the next person's out, on and on and on. And then it just becomes more normal when that moment happens.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Looking at development of coaches through this, and, I think the NFL really magnifies what this looks like, but a young coach, and again, looking back at your career, I mean, what advice do you have for a guy who is starting out and maybe is, an analyst, right? Hadn't been on the field yet, but wants to be a head coach someday. Could be the high school freshman coach who wants to be the head high school coach someday. Doesn't matter. What's the way you go about getting to those spots you want to be in this profession?
Yeah, I'll kind of think of two pieces for it because I'll tell you like some of my experience as well. Then I'll start on the first one to say like make sure where you're at, man, like you're maxing that out as hard as you can and having a blast to learn from your own staff. There was a time I'd been a defensive line coach in the NFL for 10 years, and I was always wanting what was next. I really wanted to be a coordinator. I really wanted the next thing. And I probably missed, Keith, some times during those 10 years of me wanting what's next than crushing what I was doing right now. And if I had to go back and turn back the clock, I think I would have been not as much look ahead to as opposed to right where I was at. And I was enjoying what I was doing, but there were certain, well, why is he getting promoted or why is he not? And I wasn't. And so I ended up going to college to be a defensive coordinator for 2 years, and I went back to the NFL to do that. But I did feel like there was times in that 8 or 10 year period that I was always wanting what was next and maybe missed some moments of leading and getting better into that space. So that would be one. I would say, first off, like wherever you're at, man, have a blast and max out that time with those people as much as you can, because there's going to be like really talented people a number of times on staff that you're on, whether it be an offense coordinator, you may be a defensive line coach. How do you spend time with that person? You just ask them, hey man, would you take me on to mentor me once a month on some topics of things that are important? And if you can allow yourself to do that and grow in that space, I think that's a really big deal. The second piece I would recommend for, especially for the coaches that are early on in their career, year 1, year 2, up maybe to year 5, change positions, go to the other side of the ball, coach offensive line, then go coach quarterbacks. Like the more diverse you have, you'll have a better understanding of the game, as it lays out. And so I would encourage, although it may feel uncomfortable with somebody, most of us started coaching about the positions that we played. And I was no different. I was a defensive lineman, so I got into coaching defensive line. But I would encourage somebody, just because you played that position doesn't mean you have to coach that position. And if you can be around the quarterbacks for a year or two, and then you go back to coaching defensive line, that's okay. But those perspectives, man, they will go a long way to what you want to do. So that would be two things that I would look for. One, man, like max out the people that you're with. Two, if you can have some, think of like a portfolio, a little bit of here, a little bit of there. If you could coach or work at another position, even if it's on the same side of the ball, you want to coach linebackers for a year, but you're really a DB coach, man, that'll like give you impactful things that you can use later on. As far as moving up the ladder and going to different spots early in your career, I think it's okay to move around some. Get to this staff, and find where your balance is. Then, man, you go for it as hard as you can. But building a network of coaches, in your first 2 or 3 years, 4 years of coaching, nothing wrong with that. And especially if you can move positions. I started at O-line. The next spot, I'm going to quarterbacks. Like, there's some real value in that.
Coach, the last question I have for you, and I don't know if John will have some, but and you kind of mentioned this before about if you were to ask your players what they think of you, when the game ends for you, what is that legacy? What will you want the people who have worked with you to say about, this is who Dan Quinn was, this is how Dan did things?
I think number one, I'd want them to know, whether it was a player or a coach, that I was really in it for them to be the best that they could be. So whether that's a player development or coach development, like it brought me a lot of happiness and joy when a player got a second or a third contract, knowing that maybe I had a small role in helping to that, or a coach got to move on, to a bigger leadership role or a head coaching role. So those are ones that I would hope later that they say, man, I really appreciate that Dan invested that time into me to help me become either the player I could be or the coach I could be. And to do that, I think you can't just have surface level coaching. Like if you're really going to help somebody develop, that relationship has to be strong. If you have a really good, deep relationship, you can coach somebody further. You can help develop somebody further. If it's at just a very surface level, I think you'll get surface level coaching, surface level development, like showing that you care, that you're in for what they want, that's a big deal. And so not all players will trust at the same speed. Some people drink the Kool-Aid fast and they're all in. Others, it takes more time. So I'd say make sure you customize your relationship with every player. Not every relationship's exactly the same. Some take more time to build the trust. Some happen easily. Some different positions. I would say really at the end of it, man, say like Dan really poured into me to help me become a better coach or to a better player. That's what I'd hope they say years from now. And I'd also hope that they said the most fun and I ever had was the time, playing or coaching with Dan. And hopefully also say, man, we kicked a lot of ass.
Absolutely. Well, John, I'll turn it over to you as we wrap things up. I just want to say thank you, Coach, for spending the time and the conversation we had. And John, I'll let you wrap it up.
No, I appreciate it too, Keith. It's so important, man. And we get a chance to give back to other coaches and players. And what's fun about our profession is like it never stops changing, with scheme and that. So the learning never stops. But the most important part, man, is still the relationships. And those aren't the same as we did, 20 and 30 years ago. So understanding those relationships, how important they are and the time you have to put into them, that's a really big deal. So I hope that gets across today.
Thank you.
Oh, it's all great, great stuff. I like how you put them in tough situations because they're going to happen. As soon as you said that, I thought about the first time I was a coordinator, we had a safety that just knew it all and did it all. And I remember when he went down with an ankle, I learned a valuable lesson as far as, and I'm not talking as a player, I'm talking about how he put it all together all the time with all the calls and everything else. So right after that, I learned that lesson the hard way, I think, that in fact, he came back very quickly, but I wouldn't let him talk all through practices a lot of days. Made everybody else do it. And
yeah, you learn a lot that way, dude. I've mic'd players for practices. So when if they weren't communicating at a level that I thought was acceptable, I remember playing that back to them and put it with the film and say, could you be led by you?
Yeah.
Knowing that like if the communication's not to the level it needs to be, man, you'll never be as good an offense or defense as you can be.
No doubt. I learned so much from Bob Sutton, which you obviously know really well, and then Jeff Monken. And they both, obviously Coach Monken does now, but really invests a lot in his leadership committee and stuff. Do you do the same thing at that level where you have a leadership committee that you put together?
You do. And I think it's really important to know that like they're also really invested in this and having some say in the decisions that take place because like I said, if they're part of the decision and owning part of that decision, you can be sure that it's going to come good. It's kind of like the player that wants to run a certain play, like it'll probably work, because they came up with the blitz or they came up with the certain route or a play and they know the ins and outs of it. They know what it's going to be. So I do think it's important to have the players be very involved with the important decisions that go on. And then there's times when just as the head coach, this is how we're going to do it. And this is how it has to be. They'll respect those more because they've been involved in the process on previous decisions.
Yeah, no doubt. I look at every really successful team I've ever been involved with. We had great leadership. Probably the talent was very similar.
Yes.
Some great teams and the bad teams. It was just unreal leadership, that we've had over the years. And some of these teams they're all good here. They're all good here. But so there's just, in fact, we struggled early this year and won the last 4 in a row. And it was because they never gave up on what they were doing and great leadership from the top down, obviously. But, like you talk about, Coach Monk is always coaching us all the time. And you're right, because you can't, we're not with them very much, any of us.
Yeah, that's right.
So you're right. So your leaders, your team's your leaders, because they're with each other a lot more than we're with them.
I think for guys like Monk and other coaches, man, set really high standards, for your team and expect them to go meet them and don't back off and change them. Or like, if you expect them to, these are some realistic standards that we should have here. And as long as the players are involved with that and like hold everybody to those standards, like this is who we said we're going to be and what we're going to be about. Like, don't back off those standards, man. It's too important. This is how we say we're going to get it on. And like, don't back off.
For guys that you worked for over the years, who did an unreal job of like setting the standard and demanding that it was met every day? Like who'd you really learn all that from?
I say I had this really cool experience. Like in a 6-year span, I worked for two of like fantastic coaches, and at the time, probably two of the very best in college. So 2 years at the Miami Dolphins with Nick Saban, and 2 years with Pete Carroll at the Seattle Seahawks. And these two coaches are fantastic. What I learned, John, was like both of them. If you had walked into to the building, you would have known exact environment, culture, attitude, standards of things. They went about it in different ways, but it was very, very clear of what it was. So I think the example is for all the future head coaches and leaders that are listening, be authentic to your way. Don't try to do it the way of John Luce. Don't try to do it the way of Dan Quinn. Do it in the way that's true to you, because then you're not having to act a different way. And we've all been around people that around the team, they're this way, around other people, they're another way. And so I think being authentic to who you are and lead in that way, that was so important. These two guys are going to, like, they're Hall of Fame coaches. They just did it differently, but it was very clear for both of them. And it was like such a cool experiment for me to be a part of, because I believed in both of their style, but I also knew when it was my turn to lead, I wasn't going to be Nick and I wasn't going to be Pete. I had to do it in my own way to make sure those standards were really rock solid.
You talk about completely different. I remember when I was a young coach, I remember hearing about the two of them. I think they coached back to back in the same position, Ohio State at one point. And
yes,
they had worked with them both, and they talked about, holy cow, how different. And you're right. I mean, you have to be you. And that's what Jeff Monken is. He's him and you're you, but he's consistent. And just that you talked about stretch in the beginning, but our stretch, I mean,
awesome.
We'll do it over and over and over. We played a team a couple of years ago, and they were commenting about our stretch. The head football coach was, and he said, "Man, I wish my guys would do that." I said, "Well, make them. You're the head football coach." And I knew we're going to win. We're going to win because of the little things and the high standards, right?
Yeah, don't back off them, because like at the end of it, I did an exercise last year where, what your role is or what you think your role is at the top of the paper, then pass it around the room. When it came all the way back on mine, keep us to the standard, keep accountability, keep us. So like actually most really good players want to be pushed, to be held to really high standards. And you just happen to be at a place where it's the best in the world at creating leaders, and you're still talking about it. So there's just different levels that you can go to. You happen to be at one that's at an exemplary level, and you're still trying to push it higher, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think most every player eventually realizes that you're trying to help them get to be the best they can for their best interest. I think some of them learn too late in the process.
Yeah.
But I think they all figured out eventually. I mean, you talk to somebody who coached 30 years ago, man, I wish I would have, I wish I would have understood that. But
the best compliments are, Dan, you made football easy to understand, or those things, because then I knew a player could play fast, and that the drill work was right, the teaching was right, that allowed them to, express themselves and who they were. And I think that's our job as coaches. Not everyone learns the same, gets it the same. And how do we put the guys in those spaces that allow them to do their thing at a really high level? The guys really aggressive, and we got to blitz them a lot. Like that's his superpower, and that's our job as coaches to find those out.
What do you think that? Maybe it's a tough question, but I always thought the second time around as a head football coach that you would have, especially step back, you're a coordinator, all that you'd have such an advantage, I guess. Because you step away from a couple of years, you don't have that same responsibility, and then you pop back in there. Is there anything you jump at? You said, "Man, I'm definitely going to do this better or different"?
What I know now is what things are really important and need your attention and what things aren't. And so I think your natural tendency as a head coach, especially when you're first starting, I can help with that, I can help with that. But what really is most important is say, all right, what needs the most attention right now? And make sure you focus all of your time and your energy onto those things. If the facility updates need to wait, they need to wait. Like this is the most important thing, being around the team and creating an environment together, or whatever that might look like. It might be the leading aspect. It might be, building, camaraderie amongst the group. So finding what's most important and acting on that now. I think you don't have perspective of that your first lap, John, as a head coach, but you do as a second time to say, that's not that big a deal. We'll get to that. But this right here, we need to handle today or right now, and just stay into that process, knowing what's the most important to do at the moment.
That's excellent. Well, Keith, you have anything else? I don't want to hold you all night. I'm kind of busy, I'm sure.
No, it's been great.
Awesome, guys. Well, keep doing good work, Don. It's a great program, and I'm glad to be on with you. Keith, enjoyed meeting you tonight too, man. So this is, I hope it gets to a lot of coaches, and hopefully we can keep making an impact, man.
Well, hey, thanks a ton. It really does make a huge difference. And like I said, we've been doing this for quite a while, and these clinics have really taken over with Keith's help. And obviously you've been a huge supporter, and we can't thank you enough. So we'll be rooting for you. I know that for sure.
Back at you, brother. All right. Talk to you soon, guys. Thanks.
All right. Thanks,
Take
Coach.
care.
Here are the Winning Edge takeaways and ideas for implementation. There's so many in here, but I wanted to focus on some that help you on leadership. So the first one is to invest in building strong relationships. We talk about that all the time on the podcast, but prioritizing, developing strong connections with your players and coaching staff helps you earn trust, respect, and loyalty, and creates a positive team culture where communication and collaboration thrive. That really came through in this conversation with Coach Quinn. 2, set standards and expectations. Coach Quinn is all about the standard. So establishing clear guidelines for behavior, performance, and attitude within the team promotes discipline, accountability, and a shared sense of purpose, fostering a structured environment that drives success. And 3, encourage player involvement in decision-making. Empower your players to contribute ideas, provide feedback, and take on leadership roles to enhance their commitment and ownership of team goals. Creating a cohesive and motivated team working towards common objectives will help your team win in critical situations. Thank you again for listening to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. As I mentioned in the introduction, we'll be taking a series-based approach to the podcast in 2025, bringing you a network of coaches sharing their insight and perspective on the game. We've kicked off the sprint-based football series presented by Titan Sensors with host Tony Holler already, and you'll hear from Coach Holler every 2 weeks this year. We'll be kicking off our Think Tank series presented by Modern Football Technology in January. These will be roundtable discussions with coaches on offense, defense, and special teams topics. Our Champion series presented by Signature Championship Rings will also be back as a year-long series in 2025. This will also be in a roundtable format with 3 state champions discussing various topics and sharing insight on what's helped their program reach a state championship caliber. Lastly, we want to hear from you, and we'll have opportunities for you to contribute in our Your Call segments throughout the year. We want you to be part of the podcast in 2025. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com and follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.